All right, shalom, shalom. All praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Kakadash, double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, whom will teach well. This is your brother Yeshimai from the JMS Atlanta camp. Today's video is going to be going into the so-called Native Americans, which are the tribe of Gad. All right, so I've got a couple articles and a couple scriptures that we're going to get to prove that the so-called natives are the tribe of Gad. All right. Now, as we always do when we go into these tribes, we start off with Genesis 49:1. It says, "And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days." And the reason that we bring these precepts up is because at this moment in time here in 2025, July of 2025, nobody has an answer as to where the other tribes of Israel are, right? They only have an idea of who they think the J-ish people are. And through the spirit of prophecy, we'll go ahead and pull that, since I'm going to end up quoting it. Amos 3:7, "Surely the Most High Yahweh Shem Yahushai will do nothing, but he reveals his secret unto his servants the prophets." Now, who the tribes of Israel are, that's a secret, right? That's a secret that has not been given to everybody else. So, just kind of flowing with the spirit here. Matthew 13:11, "He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given but to them it is not given." So through the spirit of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, along with the elders and the apostles, we know that Yahweh Shem Yahushai is working with us, okay? Because we know who the tribes are. So let's continue on with Gad. So like it for the long intro, it says, this is Genesis 49:19. It says, "Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last." And, in Genesis 49, it's got a small section for Gad, but history and articles show us a ton of proof that show us that the so-called natives are Gad. So first and foremost, the name Gad goes into the word troop. All right, and now this is what's the word? This is a amenomer, right? Which means that the name goes into the prophecy, or the name shows you who they are, because Gad is a troop, but they were overcome by a troop. Now, who is that troop that overcame Gad? Well, let's get the first article here. And it's just a quick AI overview. It says, "The European colonization of the Americas had a devastating impact on so-called Native American populations, resulting in a demographic collapse primarily due to disease," which, we'll get some precepts on that later. It says, "violence, forced relocation," of course, we'll get some more on that later, and starvation. It says, here's a breakdown of the key factors. It says, disease. This was arguably the most significant factor, accounting for an estimated 90% of the population decline. Europeans brought diseases like smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhus, to which Native Americans had no immunity, leading to widespread epidemics and devastating mortality rates. Now, let's take a quick pause here, and let's go into the curses. Okay, because another way that we can prove that the so-called that the so-called Native Americans are the Gadites, because they fit in with the curses, and those curses mentioned in Deuteronomy 28. So this is Deuteronomy 28 verse 21. It says, "And Yahweh Shem Yahushai shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off the land whither thou goest to possess it." Now, 2 points that I like to get here is that pestilence is going into the disease, which here it says that 90% of the deaths was because of the disease. Now, that's the curses. And then furthermore, to prove here, it says, "Until he has consumed thee from the land whither thou goest to possess it." Let's go to get 2 Ezra 13 around the 40th verse, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea the king, whom Shalmaneser the king of Assyria led away captive. And he carried them over to the waters, and so they came into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelled. Now, that lines perfectly up with the curses, because Gad is part of the northern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was taken through the Assyrian captivity. And it didn't matter, like I said in verse 21, it didn't matter where they went. They were still consumed, man. All right. So let's continue on here. Let's see here. It says, colonizers engaged in numerous wars and massacres against the so-called natives to seize the land and resources. It says forced displacement and relocation policies like the Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced many Native American tribes from their ancestral lands to reservations, leading to suffering, starvation, and death, as exemplified by the Trail of Tears. Starvation, the deliberate, on purpose, destruction of Native American food sources such as the buffalo on the Great Plains, which is a tragedy, man. There's that famous, let's go and get that. Let's see, buffalo skeletons piled up. This is a famous image here, right here. Buffalo skeletons piled up. This is a famous image. Look at what they did, man. All these buffalo. Proud, man. Obadiah. Look at all these buffalo, man. And why did they do that? You think they ate all them buffalo? No. That goes into the starvation, man. That's why, I'm not trying to stray off point here, but in proving who Gad is, we also prove who Esau Edom is. It says enslavement and forced labor. Oh, what? In some areas, particularly in Central and South America, Native Americans were enslaved and subjected to harsh labor conditions under systems like the encomienda, resulting in high mortality rates. It says, estimates of the pre-Columbian Native American population vary, ranging from 1 million to 18 million. By 1900, the Native American population in the U.S. had plummeted to its lowest point, around 237,000. Wow. Studies suggest that across the Americas, the indigenous people was reduced by as much as 90% within a century, within 100 years of European contact. This constitutes one of the largest demographic collapses in human history. Are they not under the curses? Okay. I mean, does that not prove that these so-called natives were under the curses? Now, let's get some of their treatment, okay? Because when these so-called natives were taken by these Edomites, man, they got put into what's called boarding schools. And, we hear this term come up. And, nowadays a boarding school is to, when your kid is acting up and then you send them to a boarding school and then they come back better, whether it's in the military or come back with a super high fade, super lineup, but the original boarding schools originated through the Gadites going through their portion of hell. Okay, it says the truth about the U.S. Indian boarding school policy has largely been written out of the history books. There were more than 526 government-funded and often church-ran Indian boarding schools across the U.S. in the 19th and 20th centuries. Wow. So again, Christianity had a big part in this, which shows you, too, that Christianity is nothing more than another arm of Esau Edom, man. The Revelation goes into that, the 3 unclean spirits, right? The Vatican. All right, so let's continue on. It says, Indian children were forcibly abducted by government agents, sent to schools hundreds of miles away, and beaten, starved, or otherwise abused when they spoke their native language, man. I mean, we can even go back into here. What is that, 43? No, thou shalt plant, thou shalt carry much seed, thou shalt become a proverb, smite thee, fruit of the land. Yeah, Deuteronomy 28 and 32, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. And that's exactly what happened here. They took their children and they took their power. They took their land. They slaughtered their chiefs. This proves that the so-called natives are part of the tribes of Israel, so-called Gadites. It says, beginning with the Indian Civilization Act, Fund of March 3, 1819. And I'm not laughing at it, but I'm just like, whoa. The Indian Civilization Act, knowing damn well that Gad showed these people how to farm, showed these people how to take a shower. Wow, but they wrote laws because they were so-called savages, right? I mean, wow. All right, and let's continue on. It says, in the peace policy of 1869 in the U.S., in concert with and at the urging of several denominations of the Christian church, adopted an Indian boarding school policy expressly intended to implement cultural genocide through the removal and reprogramming of American, Indian, and Alaskan Native children to accomplish the systematic destruction of Native cultures and communities. The stated purpose of the policy was to kill the Indian, save the man. Whew. What's going to sneeze? I'm not going to read the whole thing there, but it basically goes into them not being able to speak their native language, man. Them erasing who they were, right? And so what's the very next precept that comes to mind? Because, Scripture says that there's nothing new under the sun, but, this has been done before. They beat who we were from us. This is 2 Maccabees 6, verse 6. It says, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient fast, or to profess himself at all to be a J. All right? It's the same people, the same spirit, acting upon to the very same people, which are the Israelites, man. Okay? So, it just shows you, man. It just shows you that the, so-called Gadites are under the curses. So it says, let's get the second part of Genesis 49 and 19. It says, but he shall overcome at the last. Okay, and so even though Gad was taken over by these Edomites, right, at the last, which are in the latter days, the Gadites are going to overcome. All right, so let's get Revelation 7 and 5. It says, out of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. Because ultimately, we know that this is going into the elect. But ultimately, all of Israel, including Gad, shall be saved. So that's what it's going into. Is that in the end, they shall be saved, In the end, even though they got taken through the trail of tears, in the end, justice is going to be doled out according to Revelations 13 and 10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here's the patience and the faith of the saints. How many atrocities do you think these Edomites did to the so-called natives, man? You don't think that there's some kind of balance to be paid back? Is not Yahweh Hashem Yahushai a just power? Proverbs 11 verse 1, a false balance is abomination to Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, but a just weight is his delight, right? These people got to be paid back for what they've done, man. Isaiah 14 verse 1, for Yahweh Hashem Yahushai will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land, and the strangers shall be cleaved with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Here's the point, verse 2, and the people shall take them and bring them to the place, and in the Israel and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of Yahweh Hashem Yahushai for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. So even the prophecies link Gad in with salvation, man. That's what that's going into. Now, let's go from here and let's go into Deuteronomy 33, because this is the blessing from Moses to the tribes, and Gad is also included. So we'll get Deuteronomy 33 and 20. It says, and of Gad he said, blessed be he that enlargeth Gad. He dwelleth as a lion and teareth the arm with the crown of the head. Now, a couple of things to get here. It says, blessed be he that enlarges Gad. Let's get the population here of the Gadites. Okay, so let's see here. The estimated population in the U.S. is between 4 and 7. No, there was an article. Let me see here. There was an article here. It said the alone incumbent coming at 4.3. So, right here. It says the Native American population has been growing. The U.S. Census Bureau reported a significant increase from 5.2 million in 2010 to 9.7 million in 2020. Now, when we go back and we look at this part here, it says that their populations was between 1 and 18 million, and now, according to the Census Bureau, it's now at 9.7 million, which we can line that up with Genesis 22 and 17. We'll get that. Genesis 22, verse 17, it says that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, which, that lines up with Genesis 49, verse 19, in the end he shall overcome. But the point that I'm trying to get here is that, even though Gad's population was largely decimated, wiped out by 90%, Yahweh Shai is still enlarging them back into the people that they should be, back into the innumerable multitude, here in Genesis 22. All right, but furthermore, when Scripture talks about enlarging, when Gad came over here, Gad, was scattered throughout so-called Mexico, throughout so-called Cuba, but Gad ultimately ended up settling in the United States and got Canada. Now that is a huge enlargement. Look at that. For one tribe, man. Going from, a small part of Israel to taking all of this. That's Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai enlarging him. Because he inherited from America to Canada. Okay? So let's get back to Deuteronomy 33. It says, he dwelleth as a lion and teareth the arm with the crown of the head. Now, there's two more points to get here that I want to bring out. It says that he dwelleth like a lion. Well, one thing about Gad is, with all that land that they had, they were roaming the lands just as a lion does. But the point that I want to get here, too, is this part right here. It says, lions live in social groups called prides, and they are known for their hunting strategies and territorial behavior. And the reason that I want to bring that up is because, just as it says that he dwelleth as a lion, Gad, there were different tribes, just like there's different prides in lions, there's different prides, and I'm not going to name them all, I don't know them all. I know the Blackfoot, I know the Mohicans, and but the point here is that Gad was broken up into different tribes. So that's what it means. To going into he dwelleth as a lion. He was not only roaming the land, but he also they broke themselves up in tribes. It says, and he teareth the arm with the crown of the head. Now that goes, I don't have that one saved up, but when it says the crown of the head, this goes into the Native American feather hat. Let's see that right here. That's what that's going into, This was a high symbol for those in charge, in the throughout the tribe of Gad. This is what Scripture's going into. When it says, when it says right here, it says on verse 20, it says, with the crown of the head. This is the headwear that they would wear, man. All right, and so these are characteristics that, through the Spirit, Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shai, puts in front of our eyes so that we can see them. All right. It says, so we got 20. Let's get 21 here. And I think this is the last one here. It says, and he provided the first part for himself because there in a portion of the lawgiver was he seated, and he came with the heads of the people. He executed the justice of Yahweh Shem Yahushai and his judgments with Israel. Now, let's start from the middle. It says, and he came with the heads of the people. What's that going into? Again, as we read in 2nd Ezra 13, around the 40th verse, Gad came with the heads of the other tribes. And though Gad isn't the head of the northern tribes, we know that that's Lagos to Ephraim. When Gad came over here, when the scripture says, in a portion of the lawgiver was he seated, and he executed the justice of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai and his judgments with Israel. When Gad came over, right, who were the ones that were in charge of the law? It was the Levites, but the Levites didn't come over because they stayed back and then were ultimately taken over by the Babylonians. So they didn't have a lawgiver. So scriptures going into this is saying that Gad was his portion was that of a lawgiver. Let's get that precept, because Gad was the one that was used to try to he was given the portion of the lawgiver for a while. It says so this is 1 Chronicles 12:8. It says, and of the Gadites there separated themselves unto David into the whole to the wilderness men of might and men of war fit for the battle, that could handle shield and buckler, whose faces were like the face of lions, and were as swift as the roes upon the mountain. So Gad separated themselves unto the tribe, unto the northern kingdoms, man. And then it says into the whole of the wilderness men of might. Now what is that wilderness going into? It's going into the journey, because this was considered a wilderness. The 2nd Ezra 13 goes into it, a place where never mankind dwell. That's a wilderness. So when they came over, Gad was the acting lawgiver. That's what that precept's going into. Which we kind of see traces of it, because we see a lot of shaman, right? Let me see here. What else is? I think that's pretty much it, man. We can go into the curses. And there's a whole lot more for Gad too. I did a lesson on it several weeks back ago. I'm gonna put the link on it, because when you look up the history of John Adair, he was a historian that spent a lot of time with the so-called natives. Again, I'm gonna post the link here, but if you go to that video, just scroll towards the end. That's when there's the reading from the book of John Adair, and it tells you that they were calling on Yahuwah. They were saying the Shema. They were circumcising themselves. They were saying that they were separated from the other nations of the world. They said that that they had that their people had a connection with the Most High. There was a lot. They were singing, they would fast before they went into war. So there's a lot on Gad. Like this video that I'm doing, it doesn't do them justice. And even the other video, if I link it, it still doesn't do them justice, man. But there's a whole lot of Gad here. This is just like a quick overview here. So let's get Deuteronomy 28:32. Well, we already got that, all right? Because that's going into the boarding school. It says, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given to another people, and thy eye shall look and fail without longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. Now, we use this one for specifically for Judah, because of the transatlantic slave trade. But as we just read, when they were putting these kids in boarding schools, man, they were separating these families, man. Gad went through that too. Gad went through slavery too, man. All right, so, we're just showing here that they were under the curses. Let's get 37. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whether Yahweh Shem Yahushai shall lead thee. Which, by the way, two parts here. Obviously, the byword is that they're natives. Obviously, the byword is that they're so-called savages. But the last part, it says, among all nations, whether Yahweh Shem Yahushai shall lead thee. Doesn't it say in 2nd Ezra 13 around the 40th. Let's go ahead and get that real quick because it says, where Yahweh Hashem Yahushua shall lead thee. It literally says he held forth the floods. It says, verse 44, 2nd Ezra 13 and 44, for the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. And that lines up exactly with what we just read in Deuteronomy 28, man. That's the spirit. Man. That's crazy. Let's continue on. We were just at 37. Whether Yahweh shall lead thee. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. God is destroyed, man. They have the highest alcoholism, the poorest poverty rates, and the stranger, which is Esau Edom, has gone very high, man, and speaks very high, So that's pretty much it, man. I think the point has been proven. So-called natives are the tribe of Gad. And so hopefully this lesson has been edifying. Until next one, shalom.